Hello, this is Toby Query, founder of Portland Ecologists Unite. This is a recording of Mark Davis's lecture on April 7th at Disjecta Art Center in Portland, titled Ecological Novelty, a Challenge and Opportunity for Urban Ecologists and Managers. I forgot to start the recording until the fourth slide, so I'll make liberties to talk over them. Then it will transition into Mark's voice. Enjoy! Good news. Biological invasions are on the decline, and ecological novelty is on the rise. We live in a world with climate change, novel species, and novel landscapes, all of which make up systems that are ecologically novel. Mark will first talk about Svetlana Baum.
By talking about someone who's about as far away as an ecologist as one, I imagine one could get. But I found out, I discovered her in it was the early 2000s. And even though she wasn't talking anything about ecology, her ideas, I think, are extremely relevant to the topic today. Svetlana Baum, who I just heard actually died last year, so I have to use the past tense. She's a humanist, and I'm not even sure what she would have called herself. She was a visual artist, she was a writer, she was an essayist, all kinds of things. One of the things that she wrote was this book called The Future of Nostalgia. And what she was writing about was actually the people of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, how they responded to the phenomenal changes that they experienced in the 20th century. And she distinguished two different types of nostalgia. I think for lots of reasons, humans, we are naturally nostalgic. But she distinguished two different kinds of nostalgia. And she emphasized that this tendency of humans to kind of resort to nostalgia is almost expected when people are experiencing or have gone through extraordinarily rapid change to the lives that they have known. So she talked about restorative nostalgia, and that's initially what captured my attention because I was doing a lot of thinking then about restoration ecology. And as he describes it, restorative nostalgia knows two main plots: the return to origins and the conspiracy. That home is forever under siege, requiring defense against the plotting enemy. So I'll elaborate on that a little more. She distinguished that from what she called reflective nostalgia, which she said it doesn't follow a single plot. Reflection means new flexibility, not the reestablishment of stasis. The restorative nostalgia really was this heart-rending, heartfelt desire to be able to return and reestablish things the way they were believed to be in the past. Reflective nostalgia reflects on the past, but then is very flexible about that experience of thinking about the past. What does that mean with respect to what we go forward? Quite flexible. She also said restorative nostalgia takes itself dead seriously. Reflective nostalgia, she said, can be ironic and humorous, and I'd also add that can be imaginative and flexible. Okay, so that is kind of a background. We'll come back to that periodically. Okay, so cities around the world now are inhabited by residents of mixed origin, and that includes humans as well as plants and animals. Focus tonight is going to be on the plants and animals, but of course that's another big change that's happening in cities, is the rapid mixing of residents of human residents of mixed origin. Well, in some respects, that's always happened in cities. It's just happening maybe more so and more rapidly in the past. So of mixed origin, which means they're long-term residents, which we have decided to call native, and then newcomers to the cities, which interestingly can include non-native species and also native species. With respect to plants, virtually all the newcomers are non-native species. That's really not the case for animals. Certainly there are some non-native animals in cities, but in many cases the new residents in cities, and that includes North America and Europe in particular, are actually native mammals, which typically have not lived in the urban environment, but have proven themselves to be exceedingly adaptive and really quite quickly to be able to take up home in cities. So, yeah, animals really the newcomers, almost more native, but plants definitely the non-native. Okay, so that's the situation we've got. We've got plants and animals of mixed origin. How should we respond? Well, it all depends on what narrative you're working under. I mean, humans, whether we're conscious about it or not, we create stories, gives our life, our activities meaning, and so we are always operating under some narratives. Well, this is one kind of response. Let's declare war on the non-native species. That has been a very common response over the last 30 years. Humans seem to like to declare war on things. We've declared war on poverty, declared war on drugs. I guess I haven't formally declared, but war in the Middle East. How are all those going? One thing that can be sure if you declare war on something is you're pretty much going to be throwing a lot of money down the drain. But, yeah, this is classic restorative nostalgia here. There's an enemy out there, there are the newcomers, that kind of contaminated the purity of the past. We must restore that, and we must fight them to eradicate them. This is a billboard in Montana, war on weeds. It's interesting, of course, we declared war on them. They never declared war. They didn't declare war on anybody. They didn't even ask to be moved around. We moved them around. They're just being plants. And yeah, we might not like what they're doing, but this war thing is a one-way street here. Another one of these catchy little things, dead, not alive. There's, in this, and I do recognize that many people have put this approach behind them. I do know that there are many people that still fully embrace this approach, this view of the world, that, the non-natives, they shouldn't be here. Disrupted the purity of our native environments. That particular viewpoint, very religious, at least similar to fundamentalist religions, if you think about it. It's really the same narrative, is that what you hear fundamentalist religion people, and many of them talking about, it's the same desire. There's the belief that life has become kind of disrupted, contaminated by this new stuff. In many cases, it's newcomers, often people from other countries. Got to get them out. We got to be able to return to things in the past. A lot of similarities in that way. In Wisconsin, the Invasive Species Council actually gives out an award, a Invader Crusader Award. Boy, really? Disturbing. Not very scientific. So as managers, I think it is important to always ask ourselves, are we implementing science-driven policy, or are we practicing policy-driven science? If you look back to the roots of this nativism perspective, it goes back, it arose in the early 80s. And at that time, and really for about, well, into the mid-1990s at least, and of course for many people they've still stuck tight with this approach, there was no nuance here. I know many people have recognized that there needs to be nuance, and we distinguish between non-native species and non-native invasive species, but that was not present in when the fields developed. There was this dichotomous split of the world. You're either, with respect to species, you're either native or non-native. There's very evocative, often very hyperbolic language, certainly not scientific language. You couldn't have come up with more value-laden language. And there was almost sole focus on the negative effects of introduced species. There was virtually no attention given to negative effects of native species or positive effects of introduced species. So here are some, just to show you that, yeah, I'm not making this up. These are quotes from the literature at that time. Here's the definition of invader. Any taxon entering a territory in which it has never occurred before. Irrespective of whether it's causing harm, just is new to the area, it's an invader. Somebody else, yeah, these were the scientists which really developed the field of invasion biology. Invader, when a species colonizes and persists in an ecosystem in which it has never been before. Yeah, there's no distinction between whether it's causing harm or not. These are actually from some of the web pages back at that time. As the Ecological Restoration website, ideally a restoration project should consist entirely of indigenous species. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, personnel work to promote restoration using native species. This was really black and white. Here's SER in 2002. The control of exotic species should be an integral component of all restoration projects and programs. There's quite the quote by Stanley Temple. Conservation biologists should be as proficient at eradicating exotic species as they are at saving endangered species. Now, most of you are probably too young to come of age during this time, but probably many of the people that you learned about conservation, restoration, and ecology did come of age during this time, and this is what was being taught at the time. No nuance, just black and white. Native species are good, the non-native species are bad, and that was it. Michael Soule, basically the founder of the field of conservation biology, gave a talk, the third annual meeting, and the title was, the onslaught, alien species and other challenges in the coming decades. He was very prescient. Here's one thing he said. As the number of exotics in most regions produces the cosmopolitanization of remnant wildlands, there will be an agonizing period of transition, especially for ecologists. For many North American ecologists, the psychological adjustment to biogeographically combined communities.
It's kind of sad.
I know. Okay. Will be. That's good. That's fine. Okay, got it. That is good. Yeah. Will be painful. And I know, right? Sorry. And I think he's right. The group of people that I think have had the most trouble adjusting to this new world of this mixing of species actually is ecologists, more than any other group in society. What's the current situation, current dynamics in the discipline? Lots of tension going on. And the reason is, really what's taking place is there, whether you've known it or not, there is ongoing competition to define nature. I mean, nature doesn't come with any information about how we're supposed to think about it. We decide how we want to characterize nature, what narrative we want to work from. So, on the one hand, there are a growing number of people like me who really would like to retire completely the whole invader narrative. And we are actively promoting an alternative perspective. One that emphasizes not this dichotomous view of native, non-native, but simply emphasizes ecological novelty, which is really just descriptive. It's just saying, look, things are really different out there, they're new, and that's the starting point, as opposed to native, non-native, native good, non-native bad. And generally an emphasis on a more pragmatic and flexible approach. And this is from the 2011 Nature essay, which got a lot of attention. I continue to go back and reread it, and I think, this is really doesn't seem very controversial. The final line in the essay, which is really making our thesis statement, is it's time for conservationists to focus much more on the functions of species and much less on where they originated. This is often misrepresented. We're have been misrepresented in saying that it doesn't matter at all where they came from. Again, it makes me wonder how many people actually read these essays versus just kind of hear them through the grapevine. But this goes back to me, it goes back to kindergarten, just what we were taught in kindergarten. Don't judge a book by its cover. Don't judge people by whatever, the color of their skin or whatever. Don't judge species on their origin. Doesn't, to me, seem all that controversial, but for many people, it very much is. Okay, so biological invasions are on the decline. Ecological novelty is on the rise. What I'm referring to, of course, is that we need to think about this. Biological invasions themselves don't really exist. That's a concept that we've imposed. Now, I'm not saying the species aren't being spread around, and some of those, once they've been spread around by people, continue to spread. But that's different than saying the world is being infested by biological invasions. One could take an entirely different mindset and recognize the same fundamental truth. Plants and animals are being moved around a lot more than they used to be. And the result is that we have these novel ecosystems now, these novel groups of species living in the landscape. And so that's what's on the decline. What's on the decline is this invasion narrative, and what's on the rise is this ecological novelty narrative. Now, what I think is interesting, that among the leaders in the rise of emphasizing ecological novelty and abandoning the invasion paradigm are urban ecologists. Here are two very prominent people. You're probably familiar with them. Peter Del Tredici works out of Boston. Actually, Richard Foreman does too. Foreman has recently retired. Here are a couple of quotes. Tredici just acknowledging the reality. In the absence of intensive horticultural maintenance, spontaneous vegetation consisting of species of mixed origin will eventually come to dominate most urban landscapes. That's just the reality. Not saying whether it's good or bad, that's the reality. Foreman points out in urban areas, most native plant species cannot keep up with the rate of environmental changes, so continual rain of new non-native species helps keep the city green. Tredici just frankly says, look, in an urban context, the concept of restoration is really just gardening dressed up to look like ecology. And Foreman, again, just talking about the practical reality here, pulling out non-native plants near a massive mother source of dispersing seeds, areas covered by non-natives, seems analogous to using a fly swatter among billions of mosquitoes, or tilting with windmills a la Don Quixote. In Europe, many of the urban ecologists, planners, landscape architects have also explicitly moved away from this invasion narrative. There have been, in Germany in particular, there have been some very prominent, well-publicized, major restoration efforts. And in this case, this railway park, Foreman describes it, the mixed origin woodland is altogether distinctive, displaying an extremely high plant diversity composed of a rich and unique mixture of native urban plants and non-native species. It's a novel ecosystem. And Foreman's describing it in a positive way. The fact that the non-natives are there, that's a mixture of both, that's being viewed as a positive and not a negative. This was another major renovation effort in this old industrial park. This is, I guess, a famous German landscape architect. And what people have liked about this is what they call the light touch that he took, which is that he didn't really do a lot of additional gardening of the vegetation. A lot of the vegetation, of course, just spontaneously came in, and he worked with that. He didn't try to transform it into something different than what it was. Now, a question is, does accepting non-natives mean turning one's back on history? And definitely not. I mean, first of all, no question history is context, but there's no directive, well, I'm repeating myself, there's no, we haven't received a memo telling us that history is a directive as far as what we need to do in the future. It's context. And the other thing is that novelty does have its own historic roots. And I'll give you some examples. Well, one is, a common argument is, well, the native species provide a sense of place. And sometimes that's true. The reality, of course, is, well, there's certainly some exceptions, but I suspect most of the non-native plants in Oregon have been here longer than anybody has been alive here. For many people, the non-natives contribute to a sense of place. You just look at state flowers, state insects, what they've chosen. There's Vermont, their state flower, red clover. New Hampshire, lilac. They're not native plants. What did I lose here? Did I hit the... Yeah, I know, maybe did I... Looks like it's still on. Oh, yeah, that's true. Turn it off, turn it back on. There you go.
Still not working. Battery's going.
Yeah, it could be the battery's going.
It's this thing.
Yeah, so somebody can just...
It's McAfee. Antivirus.
We can
antivirus. Yeah, I just ignore them.
Invasive computer virus.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And see, those are the things that worry.
Invasive species in your computer?
Yeah. Okay, the honeybee is the state insect in Arkansas. Of course, honeybees aren't native.
The European.
And it's the state insect in about pretty close to a third of all the states in the entire country. So non-native species actually often provide a sense of place. Not many people in the Midwest know about this. You're probably more likely to be familiar with the big, very interesting controversy, very contentious debates that went on for a couple of years, maybe still going on, with respect to Mount Sutro in San Francisco. This is a wonderful urban park that was dominated by eucalyptus trees, which of course are native. And so there was a group of people who wanted to get rid of most of them, or certainly a huge number of them. And there was a remarkable pushback from the local community. Again, these eucalyptus trees are older than anybody alive in San Francisco. This park has been a beloved urban green space for people for all the time they've been alive, like the idea of taking away their trees, which is how they viewed them. So this was the website of those objecting to that. And I think the resolution was a substantially reduced management effort, dramatically reducing the number of trees that would be removed. The other thing to keep in mind, particularly with respect to plants, is the history of ecological novelty actually reflects the history. It says something about the history of the city. Well, probably easy to tell where that is. There's that distinct-looking building in the background. This is part of the famous High Line in New York City before it was transformed into what is now the most visited site of anything in New York City. It's a remarkable place. These were these elevated train tracks. This was really the corridor by which a lot of non-native plants were brought into the area. And so the presence of these plants actually reflects something about the history of the city. It's not like they just disrupted things. Now, there still is intense resistance to this more flexible perspective. There's still, by some, persistent efforts to shore up and perpetuate past approaches and perspectives. For many, there's still this, I don't mean to laugh, but this emphasis of the primary importance of geographic identity, borders, homeland, and heritage. Hate to say that sounds like something that one of our Republican presidential candidates might be emphasizing. And to be honest, that is an interesting thing to think about. I've often joked with my good friend Dan Simmerloff, and I do think we're good friends. We share so much in common except this, still bewildering to me. We're both very avid Democrats, but I tell Dan, I said, you should go hang out with the Tea Party people sometimes. I think you'd find that your kind of narrative of the world with respect to plants and animals has much in common with their view with respect to people. He tries to kind of laugh and kind of shrug it off. Other reasons for the strong resistance. In that 1989 address that Soulé gave, he also said, the control of exotics is a growth industry. He said this in '89. Now, I'm not saying that it's grown to something like the military-industrial complex, but it is a complex. It is an international one, and there are all kinds of people who are benefiting from the dominance of the invasion narrative, and you would think presumably would then be hurt if the invasion narrative was replaced by something else. I don't think that last part is necessarily true, but they're certainly benefiting from the invasion narrative now. Chemical and restoration companies, yeah, that's a lot of their work, is trying to get rid of non-native invasive species. I mean, again, let's be honest here. Conservation organizations have utilized and have demonized non-native species as an effective way to get contributions by emphasizing all the dire situation we found ourselves in with all these horrible species. We're losing all the native species. You must give us money. It's been an effective money-raising story. Again, I know many of you are employed by some of these agencies. A good part of some of the agencies at all levels is now focused on invasive species management and, in many cases, eradication. And I perfectly understand. For a lot of people, their job depends upon, or it seems to depend upon, seems like it would depend upon the perpetuation of this narrative. I mean, heck, if you're working for a company or a part of an agency and invasive species is in the title, things that I'm saying probably sound a little scary. It's like, God, would I have a job then? This is all perfectly understandable. I'm not making fun of that at all, because that is what's happened over the last 30 years. There's been this whole complex that's been built up in government, private organizations, conservation organizations, even in academia, really. I mean, people have made their academic identity as being an invasion biologist, for example. And if invasion biology disappears, who the heck am I then? So this is all, I mean, it's very understandable why, it's just practical reasons. There's so many people, organizations that are benefiting directly from the perpetuation of the invasion narrative, and so it's going to go. It's declining, but it's not going to decline quickly and without a fight. And the reason I say it is going, and ultimately I think it's inevitable, is through my conversations with younger people. I get emails like the one I'm going to show you right here, not infrequently. This was just about 2 weeks ago. Email came out of the blue by a person, she's probably maybe 24, 25. She described herself as a young conservationist, and she just wanted to thank me for what she called, these were her words, my refreshing take on the subject of non-native species. And she said she came upon my writings when she was mired in a haphazard and futile invasion plant control, in haphazard and futile invasion plant control in a wildlife refuge in Florida. The young people now are growing up in this cosmopolitan world. This is normal for them. All this people moving around, cities, their schools consisting of people from all different parts of the world, habitats now consisting of species from all parts of the world. This is not, to them, it's not new. This is just normal. This is the physicist's famous and kind of a sad commentary on science once said, science proceeds one funeral at a time. That is a sad commentary where scientists shouldn't really require actual deaths of people. But in fact, that is often the reality. Eventually the old guard dies and takes with them a lot of the ideas that are really not so relevant anymore. And so What I think is going on right now is this competition to define nature. Invasion biology sort of had it all to itself for about the first 20 years, 1980 to 2000. About 2000, including a few years before, there were some philosophers of science, a historian of science or two, not many. Since then, they've been joined by sociologists of science, and increasingly now people within the field of ecology itself. And the notion of ecological novelty as an appropriate and effective narrative to move forward with is growing. I'd say in 2016, the invasion biology narrative is still the overwhelming dominant one out there. And I don't know when it's going to change. My what does that look like? About 2035 is what I really don't know, of course. It could actually happen faster. Sometimes when things start to turn, they can flip a lot faster. You get kind of a tipping point. Maybe it'll be a little longer. There's no way in the middle of the century people are going to be preoccupied with origins of species. Species are going to be... If we think species have been mixed up around the world by now, this is going to be nothing compared to by 2050. I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying that is going to be the future. And at that point, it's just going to be nonsensical to view the origins as somehow critical for management purposes. There are definitely some signs of change. Here's the SER primer. This is 2004. With purpose to recover as much historical authority as can be reasonably accommodated. The reduction or elimination of exotic species, blah, 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 is highly desirable. Well, that's a little less than what they were saying during the 10 years before. They're not saying it's required, it's just desirable. I was interested, I just looked on the SER website. There's nothing on the first couple of pages or in the mission and vision that says anything about native or non-native species now. I didn't look through all the pages, maybe there are some, but there's nothing in the vision that is emphasizing origins at all. So I think we're definitely seeing individuals and organizations as well as individuals beginning or continuing this shift from this invasion narrative to something else. Just out of curiosity, I thought I'd take a look at the Portland website. I was surprised. I thought because I knew in other places urban ecologists were really at the kind of at the head of this movement away from the invasion paradigm. What's currently down, I'll just say, just seems still very much in tight allegiance with sort of the 1980s, 1990s invasion paradigm. There's a couple of things, just these very non-scientific words like choked out, for knapweeds. And this really bewildered me at first. Increased risk to human health. I thought, what the heck? I actually emailed Simberloff and said, do you know what this would be referring to? He responded back, he said, I don't know, unless they're referring to if a bale of knapweed falls on your head or something. I think what they might be referring to is, to some people you could get mild dermatitis by handling this. In which case, I think that should be stated. I mean, risk to human health, I think of the Zika virus, Ebola virus. Serious risk to human health. Mild dermatitis, it might be worth mentioning. Of course, lots of native species people can get allergic reactions to. It seemed like really not being genuine and fully truthful here. Unfortunately, I found a couple of examples of this statement. claiming that invasive species are the second most greatest threat to biodiversity. I hardly know what to say here. I've written articles completely debunking this. Some of my colleagues have. This was never the case. It's true on islands, oceanic islands, and not true anywhere else. In fact, invasive species are now recognized as near the bottom of threats to biodiversity outside of oceanic island habitats. A recent paper in Nature came out last year, was listing the threats to biodiversity. They didn't even mention invasive species at all. So I think the web pages could be reanalyzed and, they'll just leave it like that. So how should urban ecologists respond to ecological novelty? Well, one is hold fast to the nativism paradigm of the 80s and 90s. Never give up, never, so the rest of that, never give up. Never surrender, never give up. This battle, we're just going to wage it to the end. Take a deep breath, another option. Think less about origins. Focus much more about ecological functions. Some of you may have been at, I'm sure you were, at some of the talks today at the SER symposium. A couple of the talks that I heard by Katie and Dave Holzer. And Katie, what's your last name, Katie?
Holzer.
You're Holzer. Yeah, they're very similar. That's why I got confused, right? Holzer and Holzer. We're emphasizing that for animals, many native animals, they don't care. Or sometimes they may care. Well, they certainly don't care if it's native or non-native. In some cases, it's looking like, rather surprisingly, some of the non-native species not only work just fine for whatever their needs are, they may even work better, which there's no reason to be surprised about that. And finally, this is really where, just my closing comments here, use this concept of ecological novelty as inspiration to think of 21st century cities in novel ways. And one thing, this is a little kind of goofy, but it occurred to me when I was listening to some of the talks this morning. Oh, I guess I got a slide in here. And that is, you have to view the current time as an opportunity to rethink about how you want to go forward. And here's the kind of goofy part. I was thinking, I thought of the word, Lennon's famous song, Imagine. And so what I think is a good thought exercise, and not to do it now, we'll do it sometime, is try to imagine what it would be like if the invasion paradigm had never been initiated. And this dichotomous, this emphasis on native and non-native had never been proposed. Because that's what it was. I mean, it was a story that people decided that this is how we want to frame all of this. I'm a teacher at a college, so a very different position than many of you. It seems to me that it would be kind of stultifying to work under the nativism narrative. It's very prescriptive. It would seem like it doesn't really give you a lot of flexibility. I mean, there are certain species that we need to try to protect, and then other species, we can't do it all the time, but it's better if they weren't here. Things are just imposed by the paradigm. As opposed to, what if you didn't have that paradigm? I mean, in some respects, it may be a challenge to try to get that out of your mind. But if it weren't there, if all you had to work with was, okay, things are really different now. We got this mix of new species and old species. We got new habitats. How do we proceed from here? I mean, to me, it seems like that could be very liberating. There aren't really explicit kind of rules or priorities. you've got the full palette to work from. If it's non-native species, if they're, I don't even like the word, if there are the newcomers in many cases serve the functions better than some of the old-timers, yeah, well, then let's work with them. Otherwise, work with some of the old-timers. So that's really what I'd like to end things with, is I would view the ecological novelty perspective as much more an example of